Now, there is a trick that groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda resorted to, and that is called the myth of abrogation. In their genius brains, and they're all very ill-educated. I mean, I can't point to a single member. For everyone from bin Laden to Zawahiri to all the modern ones, the more contemporary ones, none of them are anchored in Islamic theology and law. They're all wannabes. They're all like hobbyists. They're all trained as medical doctors or engineers or computer scientists or just losers, high school dropouts that decide that they're gonna act like a jurist, dress like a jurist, try to act like adorn the insignia of a scholar. But the difference between a scholar, we were taught that you study 10 years before you're even allowed to answer simple questions. After your sort of elementary and equivalent to elementary and high school education, after you're even allowed to answer simple questions, and these guys study for 6 months or read a book or two, and then they're philosophizing about the fate of the universe. I mean, it's really horrendous and offensive. So they basically, in the myth of abrogation, is that, well, you know what, when all the stuff that comes before wage war upon the non-believers was abrogated, and all the stuff that comes after is also abrogated, and it's abrogated by this one little passage. And if it strikes you as absurd, I mean, I discussed this in one of my books, that it is absurd. I mean, it's so absurd that you can't find a respectable jurist in the history of Islam that says, yeah, this seems like a reasonable thing to do, because it just renders 2/3 of the Quran worthless. You could might as well just throw it in the garbage can, because it makes the Quran basically contradicting itself. So, what is it that they pick? Is that one is that a few of them in the myth of warfare until everyone converts, but that's actually among the fanatic groups. That's not actually the popular one. That's not actually the one that they use to recruit people. It's the self-defense one that they use to recruit people. Second step, in defending yourself, let's assume that you are in a state of self-defense. Now, all of us, just watch two neighbors fighting, and you can see how people can stretch the idea of self-defense. Well, he stepped on my garden, so I'm gonna, destroy his pavement. The idea of self-defense is, she cussed me out, so I gave her a punch in the mouth, and then unless you have a reasonableness, an ethical core to you that is reasonable, your notion of self-defense can reach absurdities. But there's a fundamental disagreement between terrorist groups and mainstream Islam, the overwhelming majority of Muslims, and that is whether, when you act in self-defense, let's again pretend, for sake of argument, that you are defending yourself. Are there any ethical boundaries for self-defense? So, for instance, in the case of the law of war, juristic classical tradition, and what most Muslims believe, you cannot. War is to be waged between armed forces versus armed forces. It is not legal for the armed to attack the unarmed. It is not lawful to attack by stealth, meaning that by treachery, or what is in technical terminology called qatl al-ghila. That it is not permissible to to lie to someone to gain their trust only to stab them in the back. Among the other points is that it is not permissible to undertake acts of general terror. This is what it's called the problem of proportionalism. In waging war, you cannot use, you have to use the most narrow possible means to defend yourself. And in fact, the Quran says, those who, in their anger and in defending themselves, know no boundaries. Those who are truly the aggressors and the unjust. Now, so how do the ISIS and Qaeda people get over the hurdle of this? Well, they say, well, they kill our civilians. So when they, meaning the Americans, the French, the whoever, but they kill all Muslims who disagree with them as well. So I mean, I don't know how they justify that part, but they say, well, they kill our civilians, so when we kill their civilians, we are acting proportionately. But that's the whole thing. Let's even assume that your enemy is acting unethically. Let's assume that your enemy is committing immoral acts. Does one immoral act justify an immoral act? In classical mainstream Islam, the answer is clearly no. Just because you've come and punched me, it doesn't mean that I go call my friends and, trap you in the dark and beat the heck out of you. This doesn't make that right. But for these people, they believe that it is justifiable, especially that, according to them, that the enemy cannot be defeated otherwise, because the enemy is so powerful. And they use a lot imageries like David fighting the Goliath, the similar type of images. The weak, we are the weak, unadvanced. We're not, we don't have resources, we don't have armies, we don't have technology, we don't have this, we don't have that. So if we watch our civilians get killed by drones and predators and planes that no one can ever see in the sky and so on and so forth. So God is going to forgive us when we give the enemy a bit of their own taste, so that, because that is the only way the enemy we can defend ourselves. But that's, I think, the difference between what these fringe groups, the way they see their worldview is, and mainstream Muslims. It's that mainstream Muslims, they disagree about the designation of enemy. That's why in Disneyland, you go to Disneyland, you find most of the, I don't want to say most, but or what's the other place, Disneyland and Universal Studios, you find so many Muslims there. You can tell just by their guards and so on, because they don't consider, they don't agree upon the designation of enemy. Second is that it is just because someone kills my child, it doesn't mean I can go kill their child. And often with even with these terrorist groups, when you put it that way, they have a very hard time when you reduce it to very concrete examples. Well, okay, so are you saying, just because someone did this, I can do this? And then they say, well, no, but this is world politics, that's something different. And so that's really, I've summed up what, we spend decades studying in seminary schools and so on, and all the different how the arguments go and how the debates go and how their logic goes. But to sell that type of opportunistic, opportunistic logic to someone, the means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means, and that the all the West is your enemy, or all Christians are your enemy, or all Americans are your enemy, to justify the idea, well, there are so many Iraqi civilians that have been killed, so many Afghani civilians have been killed. So what if you go and you kill a few American civilians, give them a little bit of the taste of their own harm, and so on, to sell that, you do what gangs in LA here do. You pick people who are angry and who are messed up, and that's what they excel at recruiting. Like these most recent attacks, the male figure, I don't know, I forgot his name. It was Juan Sayed something, or Sayed Juan something, or whatever. He came from a highly dysfunctional family. This is a typical profile of their recruits. An alcoholic father regularly beat the mother. Children regularly try to intervene to prevent beatings. The alcoholic father turns and beats the children. The mother was the provider for the family for most of their life. The father was a complete loser, never provided for the family. The kid grows up very angry, and most of his life is not just angry at his family and the world, but also angry at God, and so does all types of things that are un-Islamic things. And then these people find this individual and say, they're adept at basically saying, you want your life to start making sense, you want to feel like you have a purpose, you want to feel like a big shot, you want to feel like, you want to leave this ugly world and go to heaven where you're going to have everything you ever wanted and more, or and they sell this Hollywoodish picture package to them, and these are the people they hook, and a fast track to heaven without having to fast or pray or not drink or not get drunk or to live a moral life or an ethical life. Then you get to have all the fun and go to heaven too, all the fun in the ugly way, in the sinful way, and go to heaven too. Not everyone would go for that, but if certain people who come from highly dysfunctional, or their other favorite targets are very psychopathic personalities. I mean, the percentage of personalities you find everywhere that are sadists, that are socially antisocial in a psychotic way, and they're very good at recruiting them and sending them off to die and kill themselves, and in the process killing a lot of other people.